All right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Kevin Fellezs, the new director of the Center for Jazz Studies here, and, welcome to the first event of the 2022-23 year. I want to welcome you all. First, before we begin things, the formal, I wanted to give a thanks to Yolanda McKenzie for all her hard work in getting this together. So thank you, Yolanda. Actually, the center wouldn't run without her, so thanks. I also want to thank all of today's speakers for being willing. I know I had a pretty open-ended ambit when I first approached everyone, and you were still willing to participate, so thanks. And Tom isn't here yet. I don't see him. But Tom Wetmore, who is a recent graduate of the ethnomusicology doctoral program, will be providing, like many of us, he's a musician as well, and he'll be providing music during the lunch hour, so I look forward to that as well. So, fusion. In terms of jazz, a word that enjoys its own turbulent discourse, fusion originally referred to a set of aesthetics, merging rock and funk with jazz musical practices in the late 1960s and 1970s. Fusion's legacy can be heard in styles such as smooth jazz and acid jazz, and in the work of contemporary artists as varied as Robert Glasper, Pat Metheny, Esperanza Spalding, Thundercat, and Hiromi Uehara, and none of which would probably welcome the charge that they're a fusion musician, right? Whether one is describing a sense of fusing disparate music traditions together, or bricolaging and pastiching musical practice together in some fashion, or simply being eclectic, fusion speaks to the always emerging. Also called jazz rock or fusion jazz, and far less often jazz funk, though funky has long been a term associated with jazz, fusion has only begun to receive any credibility at all relatively recently. In 2003, the same year that Stephen Pond, Larry Waite, and I were on the first and only, as far as I know, fusion panel at the International Association for the Study of Popular Music, Jazz's magazine had a cover feature on the past and present of fusion entitled The F Word. You can see here. Provocative, yes, but pierced through with a brutal self-flagellation. The magazine has always been receptive to various styles of fusion, including smooth jazz and acid jazz, after all, featuring cover stories on electric jazz musicians, as well as prominent reviews of their recordings and live performances. Why the self-deprecation, the beat my critics to the punch attitude? One of the central criticisms leveled at fusion music in the 1970s was its commercial success, which was credited or blamed on its accessibility. The titles of the books Stephen Pond and I wrote about this music, Headhunters and Birds of Fire, speak directly to the commercial success of the style and its miscegenative threat to real jazz. The situation has shifted as younger generations of jazz journalists and practitioners have reshaped the ground on which the original criticism of fusion was lodged, becoming less strident, with some journalists even openly embracing the music. But not so long ago, fusion was often brushed off as a gateway drug to real jazz. Though it is often favored today by many who would call themselves jazz rather than rock or pop fans. But you still don't see much fusion jazz on conference programs, even those dedicated to jazz or improvisation. This symposium is the first in what I hope is an annual series of conversations about styles and forms of jazz that have been largely absent or ignored in jazz and popular music studies, with an emphasis on those jazz styles that are aligned with popular music and popular culture more broadly. So while there are fusion styles such as third stream, which is considered in ways that are more closely aligned with art and high culture, and has received far more space within jazz studies than fusion, I am much more interested in popular and middle brow and even low brow alignments. And to be clear, I'm not saying that everyone speaking today shares my attitude. Therefore, rather than having panelists discussing the works of Gunther Schuller, John Lewis, and Jacques Lussier, for instance, I hope to host discussions about Henry Mancini, Quincy Jones, and Stefan Grappelli. And I wrote this before Kristen submitted her abstract. In gathering all of us here, I hope to reconsider musical fusions, mixtures, blends, hybridities, creolizations, all of the many ways in which we might want to think of fusioning, putting the whole consideration under pressure. I had an open invitation to the speakers today to share their own ideas to this rereading of fusion as signifier for musical mixture, however conceived. And it is this widely conceived of notion of fusion, evident in the abstracts for their presentations, that I hope will fuel our conversations today. I want to end my opening comments with a short video of the J Music Ensemble, a Brooklyn-based jazz ensemble led by saxophonist Patrick Bartley. The ensemble mixes J-pop and computer game music through a jazz filter, a new fusion, if you will.
Okay, so last week I played this gig with the J Music Ensemble, which is this band that plays anime and J-pop and video game music at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. We're playing here as part of Sakura Matsuri, which is the annual cherry blossom festival here in Brooklyn. Now, the band is fronted by fellow Manhattan School of Music alumni Patrick Bartley, who is a pretty amazing jazz saxophone player. He plays with Wynton Marsalis, he's played with the Chainsmokers, he's played on Colbert.
Somebody new joining the band. Say hi to Patrick, everybody.
But Japanese pop music is a really big passion for him.
I mean, I guess like most of us in America, I came to Japanese music through video games. I would play Sonic the Hedgehog, I would play Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, all those kind of games. So I would go to the library, find the music, and then I realized, oh, it's composed by this person who's Japanese. Oh, this music comes from Japan. How far does this go?
So for me personally, playing this music, which I don't know a whole lot about, filtered through the lens of American jazz improvisation has been really interesting because it feels somehow both very different and very familiar.
Take a look at the background, if you can find any bios on these musicians and composers that made music for these games in anime and J-pop, they are all influenced by American jazz music. I mean, you have people like Yuji Ono, right, who's a composer for the music of Lupin III, and that was in the 70s. So that's very clear inspiration from things like either James Brown's band or Herbie Hancock's band, or even older, like you got Count Basie, you got Thad Jones. You can hear all that sort of stuff. Even going on to like more contemporary people like Yasutaka Nakata, who did the music, who's doing the music for Perfume and Kyari Pamyu Pamyu, Utada Hikaru, Ringo Shiina. All those J-pop artists are vastly influenced by jazz and funk and R&B music.
If I were presenting a paper on the J Music Ensemble, I would discuss Bartley's articulation of fusion, drawing on the links between language and music, cultural sensibilities that are shared across difference, and his assertions about the links between Japanese music and non-Japanese musical traditions, from jazz to the polka, all ideas I discussed in my Music of Japan class. But for today, I merely want to note how fusion in music has multiplied in a prodigious gathering of styles named by musicians themselves, such as Latin bluegrass fusion, reggae fusion, Karen traditional fusion music, Carnatic fusion, Filipino fusion, world beat raga fusion, folk fusion, Afro fusion. You get the point. The small point I am trying to make as an introductory provocation is that fusion has not stood still and remains an understudied, under-theorized set of musical performativities and aesthetics that has continued to inspire musicians and attract audiences. As bassist Adam Neely put it, fusion music can seem simultaneously very different and very familiar. A space in which the familiar and the unfamiliar jostle in ways both comfortable and uncomfortable. But today's speakers, the Center for Jazz Studies, hopes to reconsider fusion as an important part of jazz, as well as popular music more broadly.